Probably because of all the estrogen in the food system, young girls are starting, Wendy was just telling me about an article in the Times. I don't read the paper, I just listen to my spouse and she tells me everything about it.
It's not estrogen, it's probably fat.
Well, who knows whether it is, but in 1800, after the white slavery panic, when a 10-year-old might be working 14 hours a day in a factory, it was 16. That is, it was raised nationwide. In the 1900s, the age of consent ranged literally all over the map. In Hawaii in 1998, 14. Virginia, 15. Minnesota and Rhode Island, 16. Texas, 17. Wisconsin, 18. In New Hampshire, it was legal for anyone to have sex with someone under 16, even if both people were under 16. However, that doesn't count as rape. The rape is only when one person is over the age of consent and one is under. And Levine goes on to say, you know, this is absurd. She then recommends a kind of liberal thing that there should be no laws. And I think that's a mistake. And Wright, I think, also saw it as a mistake. Remember, Wright, sort of a utopian anarchist, but in very practical terms, he says, until people are able to take responsibility, we need to have these laws. And he was opposed to anarchism, you know, as a political thing. She then has the timidity to say the following. She says, well, if we're going to have laws, they should somehow balance the rights of young people against the responsibilities to protect them from predatory adults. And she says a good model of reasonable legislation is Holland's. The Dutch Parliament in 1990 made sexual intercourse for people between 12 and 16 legal, but let them employ a statutory consent age of 16 if they felt they were being coerced or exploited. So this is a little confusing. Let me just finish the quote, then I'll try to explain it. Parents can overrule the wishes of a child under 16, but only if they make a convincing case to the Council for the Protection of Children that they are really acting in the child's best interest. So what it means is that between 12 and 16, young people can legally consent to have sex. But if they later decide that the sex they had was exploitative, they can make a charge against the other person of rape. Or if their parents don't think it's a particularly good idea, the parents can bring it before a council for the protection of children. Now, to us, 12 seems rather young. On the other hand, we hear Wright saying from 12 to 15, you know, you become sexually mature at 12, you reach puberty. He's thinking Trobriand Islanders, 12, hey, you're off embracing, you're exploring, etc. And a lot of it depends on the maturation rates. I mean, kids growing up in the Netherlands have real good sex education. They don't have the abstinence-only nonsense that we struggle with here. Well, this passage in Levine's book, where she simply reports what the Dutch say, and she says this might be a good idea, becomes the focal point for two kinds of attacks. One comes from the sexual prudes, the sexual purity. She's saying that a 12-year-old can have a sexual relationship with a 40-year-old man. She is out of her mind, and the response becomes toxic to the max. The right-wing talk radio airheads, particular Dr. Laura, who now, by the way, is a fitness guru. And yeah, you go on her website, she's just selling fitness tapes. Dr. Laura, I guess, has given up railing against women working outside the home. And then Michael Savage, who is still a putz. The two of them take on Levine. And this is what came. Now Levine's book was highly vetted by experts in sex education. I don't know what that means exactly. You know, it was highly vetted, and people, and it was published by a university press. It was published by the University of Minnesota Press. After Dr. Laura and Savage the book, the University of Minnesota Press received a deluge of phone calls and emails. Quote, "You should, 1, burn in hell," wrote a concerned Savage Nation listener. 2, never receive any federal monies, i.e. my tax dollars again. 3, burn in hell. That's in case you didn't burn in hell the first time. Advised a self-described Christian minister, please do not publish this book. I implore you to burn any copies that you have already published. This should resonate with us, knowing what happened to Reich's books. Another person wrote, You in academia are nothing but a bunch of anti-family, anti-American, pro-terrorist, socialist idiots. That language is now being used against the current president. You know, socialism is a back in the airs because he's trying to get us out of this incredible economic nonsense that we have. But look, in addition to the passage being taken up by the right-wing Christian moralists who don't want any sex education and want abstinence until marriage, it was also taken up by another group. Wait a second, 12 years old, adults? So NAMBLA latched onto this book and said, wow, we now have a justification for what we want to do. NAMBLA being the North American Male Boy Love Association. Now, Levine is not a supporter of NAMBLA. Levine makes very explicit she doesn't believe in adult sexuality, but her book became, on the one hand, see, you want sex education, look what they're going to teach us, and on the other hand, we have evidence here to support our opposition to consent laws. This is all a reflection of just how totally, am I allowed to say fuck? How fucked up things are in our country.
Only when your parents consent.
You're my parents. Let me give you one other example just to show how totally bollocks our laws are. This is, I saw this woman interviewed on Now or Moyers or something. This is a Georgia woman who, when she was 17, gave a 15-year-old boy, well, when I was growing up, we called it a blowjob. I don't know what people call it politely or not. She did to this boy what Monica Lewinsky did to our president, okay? She was 17, he was 15.
Levine or the interviewer?
The
Levine or the interviewee? Who are you talking about?
A young woman in Georgia.
I see.
A young woman in Georgia whose name is Wendy Whitaker. She was charged with sodomy and given 5 months probation. She did her time for the crime of pleasuring a 15-year-old when she was 17. At that time, in Georgia, the age of consent was 16. So he was under the age of consent.
And was sodomy against the law in Georgia?
Oh, yes. She pled guilty. This was 1997. This is not ancient history. This is 1997. She pled guilty and served 5 years of probation.
5 years or 5 months?
5 years probation. I'm sorry, did I say 5 months? Yeah. 5 years. Well, a long time. but she didn't have to go to jail at least, but she was on probation. But she is now...
Did that mean that she couldn't perform oral sex anymore?
Not on probation, not with her probation officer. So, what's interesting about this is she's now a sex offender. Well, in the state of Georgia, if you're a sex offender, you cannot live within 1,000 feet of a church, a school bus, a school, or I don't know, something else. This poor woman was evicted from her home. Wherever she and her husband, she's now in her 20s, and for the rest of her life, she is going to be labeled a sex offender. And the Georgia laws were then contested, but they refined them, and there's a piece here where they interview the sheriff and says, yeah, it does sound pretty rotten for her, but you know, the law is the law, and we are here to carry it out. You know. So when Levine says maybe we should do away with age of consent laws, you can resonate when you hear a case like this. This woman for her entire life is going to be labeled as a sex offender. If in one of those 18-year-old states, Oregon, I'm surprised, I always thought Oregon, Seattle, you know, like the homebed of wisdom, or is that Washington? What's in Oregon? Portland, a great place to live, you know. 18 years old, so imagine this. A 17-year-old girl has sex with a 20-year-old guy. Remember, again, the 3 years. But let's suppose that she has sex with an 18-year-old guy. If she's 17, he has raped her. He, if caught, or if the court case, becomes a sex offender who, for the rest of his life, will be listed. And then you know that in many cases, sex offenders have to register with the local police. Their names have to be made public. Even though they've done their crime, you have to notify neighbors. There's a sex offender living in your neighborhood.